Okay.
I'm rolling on any camera.
I'm gonna have to clap this a little louder for
Okay.
you just for a second. All right, rolling. This is the Red McDaniel interview, 9:24, take 4. Comment slate.
Okay, Kent, you good?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hi, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you being willing to speak to us a little bit. I wanted to bring you in because there's so much about the human side of this story. The remarkable job you and Sybil Stockdale and other women, strong women, did to bring the plight of your husbands to the public's attention. You did it through lots of means, through the bracelets, through campaigns, through lobbying congressmen and everything. But underneath all that political drama was this very human story of a wife who loved her husband. I've been reading through your book, After the Hero Comes Home, After the Hero is Welcome, and there's a touching letter, Red, that you wrote to Dorothy and your family prior to your arrival. And I think you said, I'm going to, something about the heart of your warmth. You're going to swim in, it was something so touching and moving. Dorothy, my understanding is that in many ways, since the suffragettes, no group of women has waged a more effective political battle than you and the other wives did. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like for you in the beginning as you were told to keep quiet, and as time went on, what drove you to make the choices you did?
Well, I think we could say that we were never certain that we were doing the right thing. We were always wondering if we were making it worse or if we were doing them any favors. That was the hardest part, to not know which was the wise thing to do. But as time went along and we saw no progress, we felt compelled to tell our story and draw attention to the plight of those men.
And tell me, when you were a young bride, first married, and you had your children and everything else, you probably had a whole set of expectations about your life. And then when Red was shot down and disappeared, and how long was it before you even knew that he was alive?
Well, it was 3 years before they acknowledged he was alive. We knew that he had gotten out of an aircraft and that he had landed safely on the ground, which was a lot more than some of the families had. But we never knew for sure that he was being held prisoner, or maybe something had happened in between the shoot down and the captivity, until we did finally receive a letter from him.
Oh, wow.
So it was like an insurance policy. It was a document that we could produce and say he was alive and you had him at one time.
So we mentioned it when we visited you in your home the other day. I watched this transformation of my own mother, whose husband left when she was 5, when I was 5. And I watched her transform into a woman who had to wear all the hats, become the father and the mother, the brother and the sister, and all these things. Can you talk to me about what it was like for you with your husband almost 8 years gone? Or how many years was that? I'm sorry, Red. How many years were you gone?
I was gone a year of combat, 6 years as BOW.
6 years. So can you tell me a little bit about what that meant to you in terms of your view of life, your expectations, and how they changed?
Well, it was a matter of not being able to promise anything to the children, whether he would ever come home or not, or just how positive could we be? We really had no idea. So that was the hardest part, I think, was knowing that they needed to be prepared for whatever the news was going to be, but not wanting them to worry about it until they had to. So that was the hardest part, I think, was the uncertainty of it.
And when you got the word that Red was coming home, can you describe that to me?
Well, that was just unbelievable. It was just such a wonderful relief. It was like the weight of the world had lifted. At the same time, we were fearful because we didn't know what kind of condition he would be in, didn't know how he would relate to the children or how the children would relate to him, and what kind of issues we might be facing that we were not aware of. But we were so relieved that he would be actually physically coming home that the rest of it was something we tried not to worry about.
Motherhood is such an enormous, beautiful, powerful thing. And you strike me as an amazing mother. And when
Thank you.
Can you tell me, as a mother, what all of these events meant to you? You had to help your children. You had to welcome your husband home. You had to find ways to balance all those things. You were scared. Can you tell me about the human side of you being a mother?
Well, your instinct is to protect the children from whatever the bad news is. But at the same time, you feel that you have to be realistic with them. And that was, to me, a really hard balancing act, because there's nothing that they can do about it, and there's nothing you can do about it, and you have to make the best of it. So that the ability to help them see what was happening in our family as something that we could overcome and we could handle was the primary purpose, my primary purpose.
Someone once said to me, a mother shows a child how good the world is, and a father shows a child how the world is. It seems like you had to do both jobs.
Well, I think that's a very good description of the job we had, yes.
Red, can you tell me about the first moment when you saw Dorothy coming off that plane?
Well, it was just a great thrill. I met him at Portsmouth Naval Hospital. We were supposed to land at Oceana, but got weathered in, so they canceled the expressway and took us into the Portsmouth Naval Hospital, where I met Dorothy, Mike, David, and Leslie. They all came, and it was about early evening, probably 7 o'clock, but it was just a great thrill. I jumped out of the sedan and grabbed Dorothy, and then grabbed Leslie, and then grabbed all of them in my arms, and it was just a great thrill.
And were you aware of the work that Dorothy had done back in the States?
Yes, I had realized, not to the extent, but I realized that she had been involved in the National League of Families and that they had a great impact on getting our name out there. So I learned more after getting home, but I realized that she was involved, yes.
And what did it mean to you? I'm sure you, and when you were married as younger people, you had more perhaps stereotypical ideas of your family and your future and everything else, and then you were thrown into this national and personal tragedy. And then you discovered this woman you married who's this amazing, these other qualities that came out under duress, but you also knew that Red also rose to the occasion under the challenges he did. I suspect that has created something between the two of you that's just stunning, because there's a quiet understanding of this person has my back. Can you speak to that?
That's a good way to put it, that this person has my back, because you do realize that you need each other, and that we feel that we came through for each other, and that means a lot to us.
Her role was more difficult than mine. Mine was physical. Hers was emotional, psychological. Is he alive? Is he in captivity? With me, it was just a physical existence, trying to survive the torture, but with her, not knowing. So her role was much more difficult than mine. But I knew that she was a strong lady before I went in, and I could focus on survival, not worrying about what was on the home front. And knowing I had that strong wife back home helped me in my survival as a prisoner of war.
And this project is called the Return with Honor Project. Dorothy, when honor Does honor, I don't think that honor is different for a man or woman, but perhaps the applications of honor are different. You have to worry, you can give life into this world, and you have to worry about that life in a way that is different than perhaps the role of the father to protect that life and keep it safe. You have to ensure that life. You have to give it definition. Speak to me about honor, your own husband's code of honor, your own personal code of honor, and being a mother and being raising your family.
Well, I knew that his honor was the most important thing in the world to him, and that he would do anything to perform with honor. Whereas to me, that was not the most important thing. But he was very, very much a man of honor.
And when you say that that wasn't the most important thing, what was the
Most important thing was to get him home, no matter what you had to do to get it.
So it's fair to say you had a more practical view of life in a sense.
Well, I don't know about that, but it was, certain. I wasn't as concerned about his honor as I was about his life.
Yes, yeah. And when you put your children to bed at night, you speak about having to somehow buoy their spirits, but at the same time prepare them for the possibilities. What was that like as you read a bedtime story, or I'm sure both your son and daughter at some point along would ask, when is Daddy coming home?
Well, I used to feel that it was wrong to promise them anything because we really did not know what might or might not happen to him. So I never really talked in terms of when he comes home as much as I did if he comes home, because I wanted them to be able to handle it if he did not come home, which was certainly always a possibility. We never knew for sure whether they would come home or not.
And if you were the sustaining strength for your children, what was the sustaining strength for you?
Faith in God.
Can you say more about that, your faith?
I just believed that that our God, we had committed our lives to Him, and that He would care for us, whether that meant we would live or die. We still would be under His protection, and that was a tremendous source of strength and endurance for me at that time.
I'm sure there had to have been a lot of lonely nights when the kids were asleep and you were left finally by yourself and the day's work was done and the plans were done. And Red was alone or in limited proximity to others in his cell 8,000 miles away. When you would think about him, did you take sustenance in knowing the two of you faced the same thing, but from very different ways? That you had each other?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yes. And to know that he had the same faith that I had, that God would be in control of whatever happened to us, was a tremendous source of strength for us, both.
And tell me, can you recount for me the moment or when, at a certain point along the way, the government kept insisting you should keep things quiet, and at some point along the way, you said, I've had enough. I'm going to do what I can to get my husband home. So, do you remember that moment, or was it a series of moments? Talk to me about that development in your own thinking and how it changed you.
It was a very gradual thing for me, in that I had to have complete faith that my government would not abandon those men. But as time went along and we saw some of the events take place with the war and the different ways it was being handled and the way it was being executed, became less and less easy to believe that the powers that be really did know what they were doing. And I always felt that we were more concerned about those prisoners than than the people who were in charge of the war. Of course, they had other things to think about, but we wanted to be sure those prisoners were included in any kind of plan or any kind of purpose in the ending of that war.
And in your book, you talk about, my mother experienced this when she became a single mom. She was sort of branded. Like, there's a way in which the other women in the community sort of like distanced themselves a little bit. When you became, when your husband was missing in action, in your book you talk about experiencing a kind of perhaps withdrawal among the other naval wives. Explain that to me.
Well, I think it was because I represented to them the dangers that their husbands were facing. And it was easier not to have me around as a reminder of that. And I think that made them just not to want to be as close with me.
And I've noticed that one of the things that was so remarkable about the men in the Hanoi prison systems was that the way they counted on each other and the way they connected with each other for sustenance, for healing, for everything. I think it's fair to say that most men don't do that in general. Men maintain a little bit more distance.
Yes, I think you're right. Mm-hmm.
Whereas women seem to connect with each other. I've noticed my wife, she'll just start chatting with other women and you share something. So when the other women saw you as a source of threat, and perhaps not you personally, but the fact that
I was a reminder.
you were a reminder of what might be able to happen to them, it perhaps cut you off in a way from something that could have sustained you. What was that like for you?
I think that was more in my imagination than it was really true. That I felt that I did remind them of what could happen to their husbands, and I did. That was true. But it was a hard place to be for that reason as well.
And when you met with Sybil Stockdale and Louise Mulligan and others, what was that like for you to have this similar language, this similar experience together? In other words, when you met with Sybil, here's another woman who could understand what you're going through. Was that helpful?
Very helpful. And I always felt that Sybil especially was very wise in her decisions and that she was an excellent leader for us. Louise was as well, but Louise was a little more daring and Sybil was a little more cautious. And that caution I thought was good.
And can you tell me a little bit about the bracelets and how that came about and what that meant for you?
Well, when I first saw the bracelet, I thought it was frankly kind of silly. You know, who wants to wear a bracelet with a man's name on it? But after I saw the response that came from that bracelet, I realized that was one of the best things that ever happened, was to give those people a reminder that was on their arm all the time of this man who was waiting for release from captivity. So it was a great thing. The bracelet was a really good thing for us.
And do you remember when Red returned? I believe people started sending their bracelets to you. Do you remember any particular stories about that, or?
I just remember being deeply moved by the letters that came with those bracelets, and how these people who had worn this bracelet had never met this man, but had become so familiar with his name and with his situation that they really felt that they knew him. And it was a beautiful, beautiful thing. When I first heard about the bracelet, I thought it was kind of silly, but I realized it was one of the best things that ever happened to us, and it really caught the imagination of the American people, and was one of the lifelines we had, I think.
I've always felt that women are sort of the heart and soul of the beginning of community. It's women who really create community in a strikes me that in the Hanoi prison systems, out of necessity and desperation, the men of the Hanoi prison systems found each other and found their community. But somehow all of you did this extraordinary thing where you found the community in this country that could remember these men and that could care. And I just want to just tell you how much I respect you for the work you did. I know you did it as any good mother and any good wife would, that you did it.
We did it out of desperation.
Yes, yes, yes. But so often what is desperation also is close to inspiration, and I believe what you chose was inspired. What was it like once you began the fight, once you decided you're no longer going to be silent about this? How did it progress at that point? At what point did you realize we're starting to make headway here? And did you at any point begin to feel or understand that you were affecting the way the Vietnamese saw their prisoners?
It did, yes. Definitely, we knew that we were making an impact, both here and in Hanoi. But it was scary because we knew that once we started that, we had to keep it. We had to keep that pressure going. And that became a really hard thing to do. You know, we were tired and we had just a certain amount of energy and a certain amount of funding. And, you know, it was really hard to keep that movement going. And we knew that once we started, we had to continue.
Red, I imagine you came home to discover your wife was quite a hero, and that had to make you feel pretty special.
Really, it did really realize that she had remained very strong, and it's just a great thrill and that kept me going in Hanoi because I could focus on survival there rather than worried about my wife, whether she's going to leave me or not. I could visualize her at home. I had 3 children, and I could just focus on survival. And hers was quite different, is he dead or alive? So she's really the hero in all the situation, and her stand and her dealings with the kids.
And Dorothy, if Helen Caldecott once said, there is no force on the planet greater than a determined woman. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. If you were going to give advice to a young woman midshipman at the U.S. Naval Academy who's considering a career in the military, a career in leadership, and I think you learned some of the special values and strengths of leadership as a woman, because I think perhaps the style isn't always the same as a man. Is there anything you might be able to say to young women today who are electing to become officers, electing to become leaders in the U.S. military, from your experience?
Well, I think your character, you know, what you do daily, the way you live your life, is the main thing. And what other people see in you as your determination to do the right thing, and your ability, your willingness to take a chance and get out there and speak for what you believe in. I think those things are important, and that we did those things out of necessity. But I think it spoke volumes about what can be accomplished, because we really made a national issue out of these men, and we didn't do it thinking we were going to make a national issue, but we did it because we were desperate for our country and the people in this country to be aware of these men and what they were going through. Otherwise, I don't think they would have ever seen us again.
And did you have personal interactions with anyone in the administration here yourself, where you pled your cause and felt like you made some headway?
We did. We felt that every time, well, we were there, we were in Washington half the time, and we would see anybody that would see us, and plead our case. And our main thing was, don't forget them, don't forget about them. Because as the war went on and on and on, it just became sort of routine to know that we had POWs over there. But for them, it was certainly not routine. And as time went along, we began to see it as sort of a, it's just sort of a given that we're going to have POWs, but they can't live like that. So that was the hard part, I think.
Tell them about your friend
Keep
Bill
it,
Whitehurst, your congressman,
What about?
about how he sent you a dozen roses every.
That congressman that was my congressman from my district, the district I lived in Virginia Beach, Congressman William Whitehurst, was just a champion for these men. And every year on the anniversary, what was the
shoot-down,
anniversary?
May 19th.
May 19th, anniversary of his shoot down, he would send me a dozen roses, which was letting me know that he was not forgetting about this man, and that every time he was on the House floor, he was aware of the plight of these men.
And tell him about the
women.
call, the Vietnamization, when he called you after Nixon said he was going to Vietnamize the war without dealing.
When the President Nixon announced that we aren't going to try to win it, we aren't going to lose it, we're just going to turn it over to the Vietnamese. It was called Vietnamization. We're going to Vietnamize the war. We were like, how are you going to get the prisoners out if you do that? And I remember he called me, Congressman Whitehurst called me and said, don't worry, we won't let them leave those men over there. And I remember that as a big moment in that long period of time.
And did the experience you were going through in Washington on a national level with your husband inform the way you raised your children? Were there things that you brought to them on a weekly basis or a yearly basis that were different or informed by?
No. Tried my best to make it as normal as possible for them and not to have them involved in the discussions about the war and what was going on, but to give their lives a sense of normalcy was my primary goal.
Wow, I wish you were my mom.
Well, there's something too, when you realize that the way your life has turned is affecting your children in a horrendous way. You begin to really think about how you can make it better, how you can make things normal as possible for them. You really think a lot about that when they're going through it.
Speaking of that, the other night when we were at your home the other day, I asked you about when did you first experience normal again with Red? And I asked you about, like, normally couples have something sooner or later they'll argue about, or, and you responded with something. Could you tell the story about normal?
Me?
Yes.
I don't remember what we said.
What I said was there a first time you yelled at Red, and you weren't afraid to yell at him, and you said, yeah, I actually remember yelling at him once, and my mother turned to me and said, Dot, it's so nice to hear you. So if you could tell that story, because it's so human and beautiful.
Well, I don't remember what that was about, but I remember having that conversation, and I was very upset with him about some small thing, and we were having these words. And she came in and said, it is so nice to hear you arguing with each other again. It sounds so normal. So that was kind of cool.
And Red, what was it like for you as you began to say, oh, this is normal? What was it like for you?
Well, we lived in a vacuum for 6 years and made no decisions. And so when we came out, it took me about 6 months to decide what kind of toothpaste to use. And one of my first major decisions was my daughter Leslie came home from school and says, Mom, at school they're calling me a hairy ape at 11 years of age, and Dorothy told her to go ask her father if she could shave her legs. And so I gave her permission to shave her legs, and that was my first major decision.
And that, you knew you were home at that point.
Yes.
Yeah.
You were dealing with small things like that. That is beyond beautiful story. Well,
Ask her to tell you about the first letter we got. Ask her to tell you the story.
about the first letter.
The postman bringing it late at night.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a neat story. And then have her tell you how wonderful her children are.
I don't remember that.
Brad, the neighborhood's father was a postman, sorting mail the night before.
He came over at 10 o'clock.
Came over late at night. He was,
From the beginning.
well, one of Mike's buddies was named Brad Yeager, and his dad was our postman. And he was sorting out the mail one night and saw a letter from him, and he recognized it as being from Vietnam and being from him. I don't know how, but he did. I guess it had your
Yes,
return address on it. And he came out to my house at about 10 o'clock that night and brought that letter to me. He came up to the door and his hand was shaking like this. He said, "I thought you'd like to have this tonight." I've thought about that a lot and how nice that was, and how, the whole community was behind us. Everybody knew, and people were so good to us. But wasn't that a sweet thing to do?
Lovely. And this morning we were interviewing Bob Schumacher, and the Vietnamese were at one point trying to break him, and they had gotten a photograph of his wife at some point, and they were waving in front of his face and saying, "She's probably not even loyal to you, faithful to you," and he knew in that moment that if he showed any emotion, they would just go after him. So he said, "Yeah, she's probably gone off with the Iceman." And remember at that point, we had neighborhoods, and an Iceman showed up with ice for our refrigerators, and there was a milk bottle on the front porch, and the milkman would take that, and your postman would know your story and bring it to you at 10 o'clock at night. And
Yeah.
what a wonderful story.
Yes.
About the community.
Yes.
Well,
We had some wonderful neighbors, and, people were just so eager to help us out in any small way. It was really a beautiful thing to see.
And looking back at your experience through that time, is there anything that you would change if you could?
I don't know. No, I guess not.
Yeah.
There was, we did the best we could. I don't know what we could have done differently that would have been better.
One thing I did that I would never do again, we had a lot of young JOs and bachelors in our squadron having a new aircraft, and when they checked out of POQ, they had no place to leave their stuff. So I volunteered my attic. And so about 8 of them put their stuff in my attic, and I was my squadron's only loss with Patterson. So when they came back, they had to come one by one to get their stuff out of my attic, and that was a kind of a slow process. So I would not offer my attic in the next war. So.
It was hard for them to come over there.
Yeah. There is, I remember so many of the POWs, when they were shot down, tomorrow we're going to be interviewing Ed Alvarez, and he was the first Navy pilot shot down. And I always thought he had a sort of unique role because everyone measured themselves by him as, like, they wanted, their first question when they would arrive was, "Where's Albie? Is he here? Is he," because they would have known he was shot down. And they were, and Red was saying he was the eternal optimist. Every time that people would ask him, "When are we getting out of here?" he'd say 2 months.
Yeah.
They lost a lot of credibility over the 7 years. Besides your faith, was your family a big source of support for you as well?
Your family,
Talking to me?
Your father.
Yes.
Oh, my family?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, absolutely, yes. My dad was a source of faith. He was a man of great faith, although he was pretty shaken by that because he loved Red a lot, like a son. And it was very hard for him to think about Red being in a place that he could not help, you know, that he couldn't reach out and help him out in any way. I think it was maybe harder on the fathers than anybody,
Yes.
because they weren't able to do anything to help out.
Yeah, a father feels like he should be able to protect his children.
Yeah.
And no matter how irrational that is, sometimes you still feel it.
Mm-hmm.
You feel like I should have been able to save her. Right. Yeah, I understand that. Well, I'm just in awe of you two, and both as human beings and as inspirations. And I thank you for your service to your nation, to your community, to your family, and to each other. And thank you for the incredible honor and opportunity it is to meet you. And thank you, Dorothy, for coming and being willing to be on camera a little bit for us.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate it. Kath, are you good?
Yes.
And is there anything else, Dorothy, that you might want to touch on? I only have my questions that I come up in my own brain, but is there anything that you would like to take this opportunity to add to Red's?
Not really. I think we pretty much covered.
Okay, great.
Tell me the wonderful children.
I have some wonderful children, especially this one over here. No, my children, you know, they really are wonderful. They really were troopers.
Right.
And it was hard for them, well, that's an understatement, but, you know, they were very, very eager to make it easier for me. I remember that very well, you know, and they're very protective of me, even as little kids.
Yeah.
Mike was 9, David was 7, and our little girl was 4.
Mm-hmm.
And they really were troopers.
But they were steeled by that experience, so they've all had things happen in their families, but because of the strength they grew from that experience, they've been able to weather that well. So they have a strength that the average family doesn't have because they've experienced a great deprivation.
When Carrie and I and Kent came over the other day, when we left, Carrie turned to me and said, just what a wonderfully close family, you know, and it does
Oh.
show.
That's nice.
It's a spirit.
I appreciate that.
And
Well, it does. It creates a real bond, you know, that never goes away. Mm.
Tell them about dealing with Leslie through high school.
What?
Tell them about dealing with Leslie through high school.
Oh, what do you
I'm
say?
sorry.
Tell them about dealing with Leslie through her high school years.
all right.
I don't think we need to go there.
I think Leslie's already traumatized by being called a hairy monkey. I think that's
Thank you. That was Charlie Early.
Okay, so thank you very much. We'll go ahead and cut, Ken.